Hello, everybody, and welcome to A Day for Adventure, the premier outdoor podcast that will get you off your butt and outside. I'm Ben.
I'm Will.
And I'm Trevor.
And for this episode, we'll be talking about the gear that will give you a good night's sleep. Tents, sleeping bags, sleeping pads, and possibly even pillows. So to kind of get us started off, we're going to go back to a topic we talked about a little bit earlier in a couple of podcasts back, and that was the importance of the quality of your gear. So we talk about all the quality and all that kind of stuff, and we say get the best you can. But I want to really iterate with this specific topic when it comes to sleep stuff. Get quality gear, and the best way to get quality sleep is to get quality gear. Sorry. So that being said, your sleep gear is an investment. So don't be afraid to put a little more money or quite a bit more money into your sleeping equipment.
Well, I guess the first thing we should talk about is tents. There's a lot of different styles of tents, ranging from super light backpacking tents to A-frame platform tents, which are more permanent than anything. But I guess an important thing to look at when you're looking for your tent is what you're going to use it for, whether it be your super ultralight backpacking one or just your general dome tent. That's what I have. I think it's a 4-person Coleman dome tent. And you also should look at another thing is if they're 3-season or 4-season tents. So what does that mean? A 3-season tent means they're good for spring, fall, and summer. Basically just when the temperature is nice enough for you to be outside and sleeping. I mean, not with like a space heater next to you. And then the 4-season just includes winter. These tents are usually just more durable, so they can take a little bit of a beating from the snow and the changes in temperatures and stuff. I think there are some that supposedly keep you warmer than 3-season.
So they don't have meshes.
Yeah, there you go. 3-season tents always have meshes, so air gets in. 4-seasons tend to not have those, or at least not as many, so it'll be nicer in winter. But sometimes that can make it harder in the summer, depending on the style you have. Another thing to look into is just price. I wouldn't go buy one of the... I actually have no idea how much an ultralight backpacking one is, but I know it's too much for me to pay for currently. My troop has always used Coleman tents, the 4-person dome tents. I actually got my last one for like $38, but that's not a normal price. I bought it from a camp, so I got kind of a deal on it. And then also a big thing is just look into warranties, because tents get ripped surprisingly easily, or like the waterproofing can get damaged on them. But if you take good care of them, they'll last you a while. My 2-person tent that I used for everything has lasted me until I replaced it last summer, since I was a first year, so 10-ish years, 8 years.
Well, I just took a quick look to just kind of look at some of the ultralight tents and that are out there. So you're probably looking for a decent 2-person tent. You're probably looking at a cost somewhere between, from a starting cost of a traditional tent, probably somewhere around $250 to $500, depending on the type that you want to get. That being said, you probably want to get the best quality tent you can. So that's something to keep in mind. So yeah, tents can get a bit expensive, but there are other options. I'd just like to bring that up. So yeah, tents are one option. I think we talked about earlier at some point in time. We talked about hammocks and, bivy sacks and all sorts of other opportunities, options. You have those available. The key to those really is, compared to a tent, is that they're going to be better in certain environments, but a tent will be best pretty much in almost all it'll work in all environments, but it is not a master of any specific environment. So keep that in mind.
Yep, and as Trevor said, watch for the deals. I remember looking at an REI thing. I ended up getting a tent as a gift that was on its normal price could be up to $200, but was gotten for under $100 during one of REI's large sales.
One of their garage sales, probably. Those have great deals.
Yeah, probably. It's a fantastic tent. But if you're patient, you can find good quality tents for less money. And once you've gotten into those tents, you can enjoy a nice warm sleeping bag. Now, just like tents, there are multiple types, such as a summer one, which is usually lighter, has more ventilation to keep you cooler. 3-season, which are most sleeping bags, they'll keep you relatively warm. And then winter, which are bulkier, heavier, and again, also have more warmth and insulation. There are also different types. For example, your cheaper sleeping bag may be a rectangular or a semi-rectangular. They're more of a box shape, they don't cover your head, but they may be easier to fully unzip and use kind of as a blanket. There's also a mummy bag, which also covers your head, has some cinch straps, and can generally keep you warmer. Mummy bags may also be a little bit more expensive, especially if they have a lower degree rating. A degree rating is essentially how cold it can get while it keeps you reasonably warm. Sometimes they will have a minimum and then an average, try to give you more of a range of what it can keep you warm up to. But if you have a higher degree rating, you can augment it with using liners or extra clothing. For example, in colder weathers, a 3-season mummy bag, you can add a sleeping bag liner, or you can be wearing a hoodie and hat to keep yourself warm. In addition, there's also a difference between the type of insulation it has, down and synthetic. Down usually comes from goose and is generally warmer and usually much lighter. However, it is much more expensive, doesn't retain its heat properly when wet, and takes a long time to dry, and is hard to clean. Synthetics are usually cheaper, they're even sometimes machine washable and easier to care for. But again, they're not as warm and are heavier. Some of your lower price backpacking sleeping bags will be synthetic. I know mine personally is, and it's easier to dry and keep clean.
Yeah, I just want to jump in for a second because I do own one of each. I started out with a down mummy bag. I think it's a 0 or 10 degree bag, just because most of my camping was in Wisconsin. It was pretty cold. But when I started doing more of my backpacking, I bought or acquired, I think I actually got it for free. Anyway, I got a synthetic one because it compresses down super nicely. It was so much easier to clean. My down one, I would just kind of ignore the cleaning, which isn't a thing you should do. And actually, I use my synthetic one the most right now, just because the camping that I've been doing lately, I can kind of just drive up. So I usually throw in something to make it a little warmer if it's cold. But also it's the summer, and a lot of times I've just slept on top of it instead of inside of it.
Yeah. And as Trevor said about compression sleeves, if you're going backpacking or if you have some limited space, a compression sack can help take your already bulky sleeping bag and essentially squish it down even more so than its normal carrying case. I would recommend, though, if you are doing that, make sure you give that time to breathe, as the compression can mess with some of the insulation.
And when he says some of the insulation, what he really means is pretty much all of it. I will tell you right now, I have a sleeping bag that I brought to Philmont Scout Ranch in New Mexico. It was a $90 bag. It was a synthetic. And I put it in a compression sack, and I of course followed what William said. But then about a year and a half later, I let my older brother borrow the bag because he couldn't find his own bag and he was going on some big trip. And he had completely forgotten that you should let the bag breathe. So he didn't pull it out for 3 weeks and then didn't tell me where the bag was until October, the next time I needed the bag. And I come back to a bag that is completely unable to hold heat in at all. And the first time I go camping with that bag was probably something along the lines of a 35-degree night. The bag was originally rated for 20, and I was cold, freezing cold the whole night. So if you want to preserve a sleeping bag, I highly recommend that you let it breathe. Hang sleeping bags up. Hang them up like you would hang up a shirt in your closet. I actually recommend putting them in a closet. Hanging them up in a closet. Don't keep them in the bag for any longer than it has to be. One night's fine. One day is fine. A couple days is fine. A year is not okay. That all being said, we now need to talk about a more controversial topic in the idea of tents and sleeping and all of that, and that is sleeping pads. For those of you who maybe don't know, sleeping pads are essentially a foam or air pad that goes under you when you sleep to help you maybe get a little bit more cushioning and protection from the ground. But the more primary goal of it is it's supposed to help insulate you and the ground so that you are not sleeping on cold ground, because your back and usually where you sleep is where you have a massive heat loss. That's basic thermodynamic properties. So usually it's recommended to have a sleeping pad, but they can be a little bulky and a little heavy. So a lot of people opt not to. I'm one of those people that prefers to have them. But Trevor, were you the one that was not a fan of sleeping pads?
So I was not a fan of packing them up because I had one of the rolling ones. If I ever buy one in the future, I'm going to get one of the ones that folds up into more of a square shape. I've been told some of them aren't as soft, but I think the packing will win out. But anyway, I hated rolling it up because I could never get it tight enough, and it wasn't fitting on my backpack, so I said, screw it. And I went to Philmont for 2 weeks and a little bit longer without a sleeping pad, and that was also the same week that I slept in the gravel parking lot, just in my sleeping bag. So they can be very helpful. They can help with sleep a lot. But I still haven't decided if I'm going to go out and buy one yet.
It's kind of a give and take depending on the time. I've found that it's a nice to have, but when things happen, it's not essential. At least for me. For older campers or those who may either struggle with sleep, the sleeping pad will be able to help, but it's one that's very much a personal gear choice.
Yeah. So you mentioned older campers, and I'm always told by my dad, who is an absolute massive proponent of the idea of using sleeping pads. So he always tells everybody he talks to who asks about sleeping pads, because a lot of people don't really like sleeping pads because they're so bulky and heavy, and what do they really do? Well, my dad always tells him, I can guarantee you the quality of your sleep, maybe for a weekend, won't be much of an issue. You get 3 hours or 4 hours of sleep on a weekend. It's like, yeah, who really cares? You'll be fine. But if you do that over the span of a week or 2 weeks, like out when we were out in New Mexico at Philmont Scout Ranch, that isn't going to cut it. So in those situations, having a pad is really nice to have. The truth is, a pad will just improve the quality of your sleep for the most part. And it's definitely going to be really good for older campers. People like my dad will never stop recommending them. Me, I'm kind of mixed on them. It all depends on the situation. I would say that for most people just starting out, I'd say it's probably not your top priority. I would say it's probably going to be a third priority to after sleeping bags. But it's something I think everybody should at least try. Now, of course, that all being said, we need to talk about the types of foam pads, or the types of pads that you can have. I just mentioned one accidentally, and first one is, of course, foam. Now, for most of my scouting career when I was in Boy Scouts, foam pads was pretty much all I used. And there are a couple of big advantages to foam pads. First of all, they do a really good job of insulating because it's foam. It has tons of air pockets on the inside. Thermodynamic properties of foams are really good. There's a reason why you use ceramic foam bricks to hold heat into fire pits. But the con to that is that they can sometimes get really hot to be under. And on top of that, I have found they are not at all comfortable. Like in any way, shape, or form. They're very uncomfortable. At least for me. Now, for my older brother, he always found them to be really awesome. I don't know. He always seemed to love them. The other option you got is the inflatable sleeping pads. Now, that's what a lot of more hardened campers tend to use. Now, they used to be that the inflatable ones were way too heavy, so nobody ever brought them to like Boy Scout camp or would ever bring them out into the back country, and would only bring them along if they were car camping. But that has definitely changed in the last about 20 years. So much so that they are actually, in some cases, they are going to be lighter than a foam pad. a heavy foam pad, not a super lightweight foam pad like the one I brought to the Boundary Waters. You remember that one, Will? Yeah, but they can be very lightweight. They are way more comfortable, but they're not going to have as good of thermodynamic properties that are going to protect you from the ground. And they are also can tend to be a lot more fragile. So you can't just slam your body against them. You can't puncture that. You can't stab them with your knife out of annoyance, because otherwise they're going to break the bag. The other thing about them is they are so much more expensive. You're looking like where a good quality foam pad might cost you $25 to $30. An inflatable one will easily cost you into the $70 to $100 range. Now, for somebody who's just doing weekend campouts, I can guarantee you the price difference is not going to be that big of a problem. But if you are going to be out for a long period of time and sleep is paramount, or if you're the kind of person that sleep is paramount, I will just say get the inflatable and save yourself the trouble.
So I want to throw one con in for the inflatable ones that I've always seen, and it's a reason I've never bought one. It goes back to the reason I don't use pads is because they're hard to pack up. I have never once been able to get all the air out of a foam pad and get it rolled back up into the shape that it was given to me in. I've had friends that can do it, but I personally cannot get it to get all the air out, and it just frustrates me.
Yeah, when I was at Philmont the second time, my brother Parker, every single morning, he went and bought one of those inflatable ones because he hates the foam pads like I do. But the only difference between him and I is that he actually cares about his sleep. So he went and bought himself an inflatable one, and every single day he'd have to ask me to help him fold it up because he couldn't get enough weight on it to drive all the air out of the little tiny thing and actually like pack it into its little tiny bag. And I can guarantee you want to keep it in its tiny little bag because you don't want those things getting loose. So they can be kind of tricky to work with, but if you really care about sleep, get the inflatable ones. If you are like, I can take a couple hours less sleep, I can work with it, go take the foam pads. Of course, I think I mentioned pricing. You can find some pretty cheap pads. I've seen them foam pads will easily run as cheap as $10. Just remember that with any type of pad, whether it's a foam pad or an inflatable pad, always remember this, and that is that with the price increasing, odds are the quality will increase. But that's not exactly the case. It's not a correlation. It's really more as the quality increases, the price will increase, not the other way around. Sorry, I have to kind of clarify that.
All right, and now that we've finished talking about probably the big three in sleeping, I just want to talk about some of the other gear that you can come by. One thing that I will take over a pad all the time, just because it's how I am, is a pillow. So there's two different ways that I do pillows. One, if I'm just driving up to the campsite or it's like super close and it's easy to get to, I'll just bring a normal little small square throw pillow that you just find in your house. I've been using the same one since I was a first year, and it's easy to clean just like a normal pillow. But when I'm backpacking, what I do is I take my compression sack for my sleeping bag. I turn it inside out because there's plastic on the inside. And I put my next day's clothes in it. And I use that as a pillow because then I don't have to try to stuff a giant pillow into my backpack. So yeah, you can kind of make a pillow out of any bag, really. Another thing to have is blankets or sleeping bag liners. They're made out of relatively the same material depending on the ones you get. When I work at Summit, I bring a blanket because some of the early season nights can actually get pretty cold. And blankets is kind of like layering with clothes. If you wear the blanket on the inside of your sleeping bag, that's the warmest. You wear it on the outside and it still keeps you pretty warm. You can just throw it off to the side if you don't need it. And then sleeping bag liners, those go inside the sleeping bag and it just brings more warmth to it. I've had friends that in between like springtime when it's getting warm enough to where you don't really need a sleeping bag, they'll just sleep in their sleeping bag liners instead of a bag itself. Yeah, and then anything else that you just think would help for you to sleep, like You could bring your teddy bear with you too.
I'd recommend different sleep clothes. It's not a specified gear, but if you can change out of your normal clothes, that'll help as it'll limit any remaining sweat that may get cold as the temperatures drop. And if they're already dirty, it makes it easier to clean your sleeping bag when less crap is in it.
Yeah, I agree with William there. That's a really good idea to bring some sleep clothes. I think you listed everything I normally bring.
Even the teddy bear?
Of course. Of course I bring my teddy bear. Why would I not? He's a teddy dog, but who cares? I mean, same difference.
Same. Yeah, no, I have a dog.
Anyway, the pillow is kind of a complex problem. One thing you can do to kind of you might have mentioned this, pillows, you can use a jacket to work as a pillow. I really don't like that. My neck needs a ton of support, so I always bring an actual, like, if I can, I bring the largest, sturdiest pillow I can bring without hindering the rest of my gear. So that's just kind of a personal thing for me. If I'm summer camping, blankets always work out pretty well for me as well. So winters, I will just stick with I'll just stick with a sleeping bag, maybe throw a blanket on the inside of the sleeping bag to keep myself a little warmer because my bag has lost all of its heat holding abilities. All right. Anyway, so let's talk about acquiring all of this equipment and buying all of this gear. So when it comes to buying, there are really two ways to buy. You can either buy new or you can buy used. So buying new is going to be probably the most common way that most people buy their gear. When you buy your gear new, you usually will have things like warranties. You'll have things like, you'll know it's going to be fresh and ready to go right when you buy it. You aren't going to have to repair anything. You're not going to have to do any of that. And if something is broken, you can bring it back. And usually, odds are, if you go to a place like REI, you can get that gear replaced, or they'll buy it back from you for a reduced price. That all being said, the best ways to buy new, you got to check for some deals. You would be surprised the kind of deals you can get on camping gear, especially with sleeping bags and tents. Sleeping pads, hit or miss with the deals on those. But I've seen some really good deals on sleeping bags in the past. Again, I highly recommend that when you're looking for tents, sleeping bags, sleeping pads, any sleeping gear that is really, really outdoor oriented, go to a place that's an outdoor outfitter. REI is probably my favorite. Again, we're all from Wisconsin in the Milwaukee region, so we tend to all gravitate towards REI because that's what's local to us. But there are other places that are out there. So, of course, find your local area. And
there's also some local outdoor shops that are actually pretty nice as well. I don't think we have any of those around us. I know Madison has a nice one. I learned about it when I went to a climbing documentary out there. But yeah, look for your small little family-owned outdoor shops. There's a really nice one in the town right by my camp that I work at that I can't remember the name of, but that's where we got all of our climbing rope. And the whole top section of the store is used gear, and the whole bottom section of the store is new gear.
Also look at military surplus shops. They tend to have
military surplus
nice
is a really good place to look.
Camping gear, if you know where to look. Some of this gear can be pretty old, so just make sure you do your research before you pick anything up.
Yeah, especially
try it on there too.
Yeah, especially with military surplus stuff. Definitely do your research. There's all sorts of really cool stuff you can get with military surplus. There's a lot of places you can buy it, and it's very inexpensive. You can get U.S. made, you could get British made, Czechoslovakian made. You never know what you're getting. You might find some real treasure troves in those kind of places. They're really good places to look. But that being said, one little con to buying military surplus is that sometimes it's not going to be super lightweight, so it's going to be more military style. It's going to be a little heavier. It's going to be more tough and rugged, but it's also going to be a lot more geared toward the masses, if you will. So it's not going to be a lot of specialized gear. It's going to be a sleeping bag. What's so special about the sleeping bag? It's a sleeping bag. Is it lightweight? No. Is it comfortable? It's okay. That's that kind of stuff. So that's something. So definitely do your research, get the right size, try it on if you can. at one of these at a surplus store. Another option you have that generally will be mostly more common when you're going to more like national parks, or if you're going to a place like we keep mentioning Philmont Scout Ranch because it's a great option, is renting. So it's a really, really, really good thing to have, or it's a really good thing to be able to rent something if you don't want to buy it. Common things to rent. Tents are going to be very common to rent. Sleeping bags, not so much, because again, you kind of have to clean sleeping bags after every time somebody uses it. But it's a really, really good place to get some really good gear that's going to be very expensive. Just understand that when it comes to renting gear, you might not always be getting the best quality, and it will definitely not be in the best condition. Bringing up an old story from me and William on an unrelated topic for acquiring gear. When we were up in the Boundary Waters, when we got our stoves, we got 2 broken stoves right from the beginning, and we were not given a repair kit to fix the stoves in the backcountry. So we had to spend an entire week camping on or cooking on fire pits. Now, luckily, the Boundary Waters is filled with trees. It's literally all trees everywhere. So we were lucky enough in that situation. But if we didn't know how to build fires, we would have had some serious problems. If we didn't know how to cook on fires, we sure as hell got very good at it. So that's something to really understand about renting gear. The other option you always have is borrowing. Borrowing gear tends to be free, or as free as it can get. Maybe a couple of, maybe having to buy some beers for some friends. You might have to do that to borrow some gear. Got to do what you got to do. Usually this will be free, or at least as free as it can get. The quality is going to be very inconsistent because you never really know what you're getting. And sometimes it might be damaged. Sometimes it might not be damaged. Sometimes there's going to be no instructions whatsoever as to how to use it. The other part of that is you got to kind of know somebody that has the gear you're looking for. So if you're looking for a tent, you got to know somebody who has a tent that is going to be what you're looking for.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of suggesting on the borrowing gear. The first time I went to Philmont, I have not yet in my life owned a large, like month-long, big backpacking backpack with an internal or external frame. I borrowed my friends from my patrols, and that one I have always so it's consistent for me because I know the gear because I always borrow it from him. But then even when I went, I borrowed a sleeping bag from my troop because I did not own my compression one yet. And so I borrowed, it was great. It was a brand new one the troop had just got. I was the first person to use it, and I put a 2-week trip into it of a nice compression backpacking sleeping bag.
Just remember when you are borrowing gear is that it's extra important to return it clean and in good condition.
That's a really good way to be able to make sure that you can acquire that gear the next time that you need it. So that being said, one thing I will not recommend is if you are borrowing gear that you know you're going to need multiple times and you have to keep going off and borrowing it, it's not a good idea to go keep borrowing it. Just borrow it if you need it once or twice, like if you're going out to the Philmont, for example, and you need to borrow your buddy's backpack if you're going once or twice. But if you're going to go 4 or 5 times, or you're going to be needing that backpack 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times a year, you might want to go and buy your own.
Yeah, by that point, even renting's out of the option because it's just going to be more expensive.
Yeah, because that's another thing to consider is if you are using that gear all the time, go and buy it yourself. It's going to save you a lot of time and money and a lot of favors as well.
I guess moving on, the next topic of discussion would just be taking care of gear, whether it be your own gear, rented gear, gear you're borrowing, especially if it's gear you're borrowing. Don't be a dick to your friends. We talked a bit about it before, but we'll go a little more in depth here. Make sure that the gear is clean and dry. Keeping wet gear in a bag, especially tents or sleeping bags, if they get wet and you don't dry them out, you're going to ruin them. They're going to become moldy probably. And also going along with that, you want to keep them in a cool, dry place, just like most of your stuff that you own. You don't want to keep it in a wet, damp basement cellar thing where it's constantly dripped on or something. And this one we went over a lot, but I just want to reiterate it one more time. I didn't really know it until today, which worries me with my sleeping bag I have next to me. But don't keep your sleeping bag in a compressive sleeve. Personally, mine has been in it since I really got it. I don't know if that's ruined it, and I'm worried to find out. But my next camping trip, I'm gonna have a pillow and a sleeping bag, so I think I'll be, or a pillow and a blanket, so I'm gonna be fine. And the big thing is also, I hit on it again before, but do not store your wet tents. Yes, you can get some big tents, and they're hard to dry out. But I guess the easiest way to dry out a tent is to just go set it up in your backyard if you have one, stake it down, and just let it dry out throughout the day. That's what I did. I'd bring mine home and I'd try to wash it out as best as you can wash a tent, and then let it dry outside.
If you can't dry it outside, you could either set it up inside or hang dry it, but make sure you have fans to create circulation in it throughout your house or dorm.
Yep. Oh god, I can't imagine drying a tent in my old dorm.
Oh,
I can imagine it in my new house, but not in my old dorm. Alrighty, so this has been a day for adventure. Next time, we're going to discuss cheap versus expensive gear and where you can save money and where you should splurge a little bit. But for now, get off your butt, get outside, and have a fantastic adventure.